The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, everyone, it is 3 o'clock Eastern Time. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Next Level Estimating with Wood Partners. If you are new joining us today, you will see this panel over on the side of your screen. You can collapse and expand that at will. You'll see a handouts and resources section. It should be empty today. We don't have any handouts for you, but what's important is that question section right below. Feel free to drop any question in as they come up. Me and the moderators are the only ones who can see those. If it's something pertinent to what we're talking about at the time, we'll hop right in and answer it for you. If it's something important, but a little more big picture, we'll save it for the end where we'll have a question and answer section and we will revisit that. So anything that comes up, feel free to drop that in for us. Also, tomorrow you should be receiving a recording of today's webinar along with this survey. It's a quick survey, probably 4 or 5 questions. What did you think about the webinar? How did you like the topic? What do you want to see next? Things to keep, all things that are important to us to make sure we keep making good content. So please take some time to fill that out. We really appreciate it. That being said, housekeeping behind us, we'll go ahead and hop right into the webinar, Next Level Estimating with Wood Partners. I am one of your speakers today, Adam Cook. I'm a product sales engineer at Virtuosity. I work very closely with OpenSite and OpenSite SiteOps, the software we're going to be looking at today. And joining me is a very special guest, Ben Carter. He is Vice President of Pre-Construction over at Wood Partners. He's been using the software for a couple years now, definitely an expert, used it on projects of all types and sizes, and has picked up a lot of tips and tricks on the way. So Ben, thank you for giving some of your time to give us a candid look at the software and answer some questions.
Thank you, Adam.
And so that's just a very brief introduction. We're going to get into it, in just a second here. I'm going to hand it over to Ben. We'll get to know him a little bit better. After that, we're looking really at what is your first step of a new project. You get a PDF or you have an address and you have an idea. What do we do right out the gate? Once we have that first step done, how easy is it to use the software? What does it look like using the software? How do we create that project? On top of that, once everything is created, what's returning to us? How do we get the estimate out of that? How accurate is that estimate? And maybe what can we do to improve or ensure that accuracy? And finally, at the end, we'll conclude with a question and answer section. So, that being said, I'm going to hand the reins over to Ben, and we can hop right into the software. And Ben, you should have access now.
All right.
Yeah, you're live. I'm seeing a blank SiteOps screen.
Blank SiteOps screen. All right. So for our audience, just a bit of background. Wood Partners is a developer builder of multifamily apartments. So that's our focus. So we've kind of specialized our use of SiteOps for that particular product. With that said, we have 2 primary product types, suburban and urban. Urban being taking up the whole site block, and suburban being over number of acres, 10 to 15 acres. So for our project demo today, we will be doing an urban project in Nashville, Tennessee. And urban projects are a little more straightforward than suburban because the sites are more constrained. And Adam, let me know if I'm speaking loud enough.
Yeah, all clear.
Good. So for our starting point here, we have brand new project, nothing's in SiteOps. We're starting clean slate right out of the gate. And the very first step for starting a project is the Geolocate. So in this case, we'll type in our address.
And this is all done directly right in SiteOps, correct?
Yep, we're doing it right now. So it'll take me right to our project site right there. I'll back it off just a tad bit, right about there. and select location. So now that we have that, next step we got is we want to import our ESRI layer so we can see some imagery. So I'll pick world imagery. It's a good one. It's got some good images. So boom, there we go. We got our site. Now, next step is to import an image. So what we've done here is we were given a PDF, and let me find my Nashville stuff. Nashville, I think that's it. Pursuit, 210 Cumberland Bend, and right in here. So we were given a PDF, but the program doesn't import PDF. So we save the PDF as a JPEG so we can import it. And in just a moment, it'll pop up right there. So if we zoom in a bit, we can see exactly what we were given as the pricing document. This is a typical, what we would call a density study, which is a very preliminary one-layer floor plan overlaid on a site image. Mm-hmm. So this is what we're typically given to run our estimate with. And so what we're trying to do now is create earthwork quantities and foundation wall quantities from this document using site ops. So the first step in order to is now that we've gotten here, we want to get this plan right here to the same scale and alignment as what's in our image here for that's in site ops. So in order to do that, first we need to create a layer. They're up here, and we're going to call this layer distance path, because it's going to give us our distance path. And we'll make it a nice bright color so we can see it. All right, so the key here is to find two common points as far apart as possible in order to create the same scale and reference. So two nice clear points. One is this corner of this parking lot here, and the other would be this concrete pylon out in the river. So we're going to go to, draw path, and we're already in distance path there. I'm sorry, we're not. So we'll escape out of that. Get there. Path. All right. So we're going to get right up on it. Go there, and then go right out to the center of this pylon. Right there. And then we're going to hit in path.
And you're just kind of eyeballing it here based off of
yeah, just getting as close as we can. Find. So that gave us a distance right there, 655.51 feet. So I always do use Excel for calculators. So that's that one. Now our other one is going to be in the image. So we're going to go find the same 2 points and draw the line from right there down to the concrete pylon. And in path. Now, as we see, can't hardly read that one, so we're going to do something here. Kind of helps us with our overlay. We're going to change the transparency to about 50%. Now, we got that distance, 255.83. So, and then divide by that one over that one, and it comes out to 2.56. So we go into scale, 2.56. Now they are the same scale. So the next step is to move it. So we already got that there. Go to edit, move. I'm going to pick that same point right in the corner of the parking spot. I'm going to move it here. Created one point that's the same. So the second step is to get it rotated. So we go with the same item there. Pick this as our point of rotation center. And so the from angle, we go down to the pylon. Center the pylon. Just rotate it right up until it hits. All right, now we have scaled and matched our overlay to the
Yeah, definitely right on there too.
yeah. And so if we want to just check, the import came in layer 0, make it whatever layer you want. So if you just want to kind of do a quick check of, is your overlay right? Turn it off and on. But then, and that's, now you're ready to roll. So I always like to hit a save when we're in there so we don't lose our work. All right, now next step. First, we're done with that, so delete that guy. Next step is, now we start, next step is to get the boundaries of our property, because we're gonna have to import topo, and we don't want to import more topo than we need. So let's go into layout and hit our boundary. This is going to be the edge of our work, disturbed area.
And Ben, one question while you're outlining that's come in is how much CAD experience do you have? Were you doing this before using SiteOps, working in Civil 3D?
None, no CAD experience at all before SiteOps, except when I was about 22 years old. So not since then. So remove the boundary. Now we have our working area. And if we want, let's see if it'll work. So next thing we're going to do is pull in topo. So we're going to try and see if ESRI Topo is working. Oh, it's not wanting. I don't know if it's what the issue is, but at some point, at this point is when you can pull in your existing topo, and we'll go to another version to see what that looks like, but it'd be that button right there, and it'll load up topo, and then you have your existing topo. So,
and that does pull from ESRI servers, which is it's a third-party company,
yep.
But it pulls directly in to SiteOps.
So far, I've had really good luck with ESRI Topo, and this is luck as far as it matching kind of what we should have. I just saw a little error here in that I didn't pick up my storm area here. So it's one thing we can do. We can create some points to enlarge our boundary.
Do you normally, when you're using ESRI Topo, do you use that as a first step and then pull in survey, or do you think it's accurate enough to get that estimate off of?
I almost always just use the ESRI Topo.
Okay.
Usually if the survey comes in, we'll take a look at it, but most of the time it's not even worth really replacing it.
And we actually, it's funny, so we, one of our technical guys reached out to me and he said, we've experienced difficulty in the past using ESRI with the GoToWebinar software, something with probably, pulling the data. And so that makes sense on why.
Is that what, so it's because we're on the webinar that it's not pulling the data in?
I think so. I think it's something with the projection. That's what I've been told.
Yeah. So one thing I showed real quick there, again, I haven't used CAD in a long time, but one thing that I could probably remember is you can always add points to make your line bend out to where you need it to go. So I forgot to pull the stormwater into my property boundary on that one, but it's not hard to go back and add it in there. So after I pull in topo, you can pull in topo really at any point when you're ready to do Grade Solver. But the next steps, you really can't do anything until you get the building layout. So your next step is to start putting your building area in. In this area, we have it's a flat site. So our building's all one level. except for the parking garage, is a multi-level sloping type animal. Usually on this area, I'll just cover the courtyards because they're essentially, unless they're depressed, they're going to be roughly the same as your building inside those interior courtyards. One thing I'll note here is I don't get super exact. I'm just getting close on these building edges because for our purposes, being exact doesn't really do a lot for you. But that gets your building outline right there. And then because of how we do parking, I would come in and do it kind of a four-part deal because it has multiple levels and I want to catch all those. So you've
created that building pad, that'll keep that whole, the first one you created was a building pad, and that'll keep that whole area you've outlined at a zero slope, right? Are you using parking for the parking garage?
Yeah. So, no, I do not. So what I do in here is when I get, so these sloped areas here, what I'll end up doing is, move that line over. What I'll end up doing is pinning, do a link to that side and that side, and a link to that side and that side, and delink these sides, and then let it go 6% slope. And then I'm setting this to be 5.5 feet over this level.
Okay.
So if you want, I can jump ahead a little bit to kind of show what the more finished product looks like.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, we'll pretend you outlined. I mean, we can see what you're doing.
I'll throw one more area here because we have like a pool courtyard, so we got to cover that. There's other areas we want to cover. But when I get really, as I think I learned here before, you can start with any area. You can just start everything with other area and then change it after the fact to be what you wanted, because it doesn't really care. So in this case, we started with just an other area and then went up here, and I'm just going to pick sidewalk because it's going to give kind of this little slope to it.
Okay.
And again, you just kind of figure out what works for you. There is no such thing as pool courtyard as an area, so you pick what area you think will work to what you want it to look like. So I'm going to jump out of this one and jump to all the way to the end.
How long do you think? Because you mentioned you don't use much CAD, but you're very fluid when you're adding these vertexes, expanding it, around your stormwater. You're changing your areas between other area and sidewalk. How long do you think it took you to get to that level of comfort inside site ops?
Well, I think, as I said, it's just kind of knowing some basics of it. So no, it didn't take long because it really was just knowing basics, which is, because on this one we're not giving instructions for the lawn. We're just hitting dots as we trace around it. And the main thing I think of understanding is that we don't have to be exact. We want to be more fast than exact because approximate is absolutely good enough. The main thing to watch is the things that will cause you to have grading problems, such as overlaps and things like that. So you do got to watch your overlaps a little bit because it'll throw the program off. So you do have to be careful in certain situations like that. But if you're not close to an overlap, then it's not really a huge deal. So in this case, we've got everything lined in. We've got the links the way we want them, and we've actually hard set the elevation for this pad right here because we're in a flood zone. And so one of our instructions in our from our developer was we have to set the pad up at least at 410 to be out of the flood zone from this river here. So once all that's set up, you hit the grading solver. And really, I think one thing
we switched files. I was just going to clarify. We switched files here into one that we had pulled in topography outside of GoToWebinar. So now we're acting existing ESRI terrain.
Yeah. So this one has all the stuff in it. Has some extra things that I drew in there. We have a stormwater basin over here. It's a very small basin, so we put walls in to make it work. And I just to give you an idea of how I did that. So that's why I didn't use the stormwater function. I just drew an area. And then I, let's see, sorry, properties. And then I went to select all sides and delink the height. This is important. And then on the area itself, I set the maximum Z at 398 to hold it down. So that basically formed a stormwater basin over here. So a lot of this one is a lot of forced elevation because that's just what we have here. And then just to get it to kind of grade properly on an urban site, also constrain the max slope to 10%, which worked good. Sometimes if the site's got too much topography, that might not work, but generally on urbans, I like to constrain it because you're so full of sidewalks and things around it that you're not going to see any kind of real aggressive grading. So that kind of gets you a more realistic look at it. As you kind of see how I did, force this one and force this one, and then link this one and this one, this one, this one. And then inside of that area, catch the area. So down here, I let it go a maximum 6%. So even though I had a building slab or a building area, you can still change it to let it slope. So like a parking garage, you would do that.
Okay, and so thinking of how much information site ops provided versus you kind of hard coded in, you said you had been working on the project, and then you got the change order, and it said, oh wait, there's a flood elevation. You have to raise the building pad. So you set that building pad at 410. Did you also, and then you went back and you adjusted the parking decks too?
Yes. Yep. That was the easiest way to do it. So just if we catch that area there, and it's got that hard set at 410. So just to see what it would look like if you took it out, it would lower that slab down to make it less import, less walls.
Yeah.
So that shows you, I would need to decouple that one, or at least to hard set these again to let them fall as well. But it would put it much more on grade. Of course, in this case too, it's actually sinking a corner, which sometimes we have these ones where the program, if you don't tell it what to do, it'll let a corner sink in, and you may not want that. Mm-hmm. So in order to fix that problem, because a lot of this stuff is you see in 3 dimensions what it's doing, and then you're like, okay, that didn't do exactly what I wanted to do. So what am I going to do in order to fix the problem? So we're at a high point on the site right here. We're like, okay, we want to pin our building up here. So let me create 2 points. Let me throw in 2 points here to create these 2 little segments, and then let me link those heights so that it doesn't let it fall below that grade.
A lot of this, did you take a course, or is this you kind of just playing around with the software and doing so many sites?
Yep. No, yeah, it's just kind of knowing the basics of what works as far as the main thing of learning this one is how the linking works, because that's kind of critical where you link and delink to let your walls form. So that's not really a CAD thing to me. That's specific to site ops. But you kind of see, because the problems crop up and become apparent in this 3-dimensional view. So then you're like, okay, I saw that I had a slightly higher point over here. You guys don't really want to bury anything. They want to sit up above a little bit. So now we've set up a little bit, and it gave me, so go back here, it gave 407.5 as your kind of optimal finished floor elevation. Again, if I was really doing this, I'd go fix these 2 to kind of link one here, and then this one would be 5.5. You could link this one here and have it be 5.5 over. So that would create your parking deck the way you want it to be.
Yeah, and so I guess this is kind of what you had in the beginning, and then the floodplain was pointed out to you. So then instead of doing the linking optimization, you just clicked on it and you set the finished floor exactly to 410.
Yep. Set it exactly 410 and then let it fly. And so once you know your three-dimensional is kind of doing what it's supposed to do, the next thing you do is, okay, now I got to get some information on this thing for what for my estimate. That's what we're doing it for as much as anything. We do it for our estimate, and we also do it to check V too, because we've had situations where architects have set floor elevations not realizing the cost impacts to those elevations. So sometimes we can go in and say, okay, you know, if you make this change, we can save some money. But in this case, it's spitting out 8,600 square feet of retaining wall, 3,800 cut to fill, and 6,000 import. Now, always bear in mind that I think, you know, to check and see whether you're using your shrink swell on that or not. A lot of times I'll do it straight up without, and then I'll add it in the estimate.
Yes. Yeah, so how often, if an architect gives you something, how often do you kind of raise it and lower it 2 feet and rerun it for the estimation, you know, just to compare prices? Or like, are you looking at multiple iterations for each of these projects?
A little bit, because what I've done, we had one where, let me see, I'll show one here that just for an example of doing some VE. Find it. There we go. So on this one, it's another one in Tennessee. Get it open up. I'll give you an example on this one of one where we did a VE. So I can get it open. All right. So this is another deck wrap type deal, and this one's got a lot more topo to it. So it's got a lot more stepping. And when we evaluated the way the parking deck wanted to work, so in this case, this was the parking deck entry right here. The architect wanted to make a turn here and ramp this side up. And what it was doing is, we see right down here, we've got a 24,000 yard export. So before but when we did it his way, we had a 35,000 yard export. And we came back to him and said, well, what if we switch the ramping around this way, and we were able to reduce walls and reduce import? And the architect was like, okay, that's fine. Wasn't the way we thought we'd do it, but we'll do it your way. And so that's an example of kind of showing them something. And even on this one, this is one where they forced elevation on us, and we go back and show them, like, hey guys, you're burying some of your units over here and over here, you know, and this is, you know, what if we come back and lift these slabs up a little bit? Now we can start getting back to a more balanced scenario. But the great thing is one, it's giving you that earthwork calculation that's really hard to get early on. It's also giving you, on these urban, it's giving you a lot of walls, a tremendous wall quantity going around this thing that would be very difficult to quantify without this. So we really love that it spits that number out as well, because on these type of deals, that's a big variable, is your wall quantity.
Yeah, well, and that's something too, like it producing this 3D model, like you said, you just run it and then immediately it's glaring, hey, we're below grade here. Some of these units are below grade. One question someone from the audience was asking, we see there's total cost over on the side and has retaining wall cost, you know, it's calculating your sidewalk cost. How much, you can change those costs inside the software. Do you manipulate those a lot inside the software to give you a cost automatically, or are you taking just the earthwork quantity and implementing your own cost?
Yep, I'm just taking the quantity out. The only thing that the costs are really good for is the optimization part, which trying to find an optimized balance between wall and dirt. So if usually the costs that are in there at least are relatively close enough for the program to run that scenario. But as far as actually using the cost the way we use it, we don't really pay any attention to to these for our estimate, we're plugging in these quantities over here. So this is the one that had a lot of retaining wall. But in the case, this one, it's the optimization part of the program is not really doing a whole lot because we're forced onto our elevations. So we're not letting the program change things too much. It's more of, it tells us what the quantities are. It's just basically a quantity output at this point, more than it trying to find its own way. Now, if we're letting it, if it's a different one, and this just happens to be one where we're restricted for certain elevations, so we can't let it float the slab to where it wants to go. In other ones that it would play out, and in that case, it probably would make sense that, okay, if I'm doing concrete walls, I need to be somewhere around 70 a square foot all in rather than 25 because these are concrete.
Okay, and then another question too, I just saw, and an audience member was wondering about, right there you had earthwork quantity that you said you normally look at, and then it also had rock right below that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get around with that? Or are you pulling in a Geotech report? Or I know ESRI doesn't know where the rock is.
Nope. So that's one that usually our first run we don't even have Geotech, so we're going without it. So once we get the Geotech in, then we would go in and put a boring point in, and then
that's cool.
Then you go to the properties from it, and you could give it the rock depth. So you give it the rock depth, and let's say that one, I don't know what we're cutting in here. Let's just say it's shallow. It's 2, and you put them all in there, and then you run the grading solver. A little slow here. So run a little bit, and then now we go view report, and now we have rock in there.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
And one thing too, if you are, thinking about taking this on, you won't always have Ben at your side being able to show you exactly how to do it. But with Virtuosity, we actually do include training. And so we can answer those sort of exact questions. And just like that, when you know how to click it, you just did that so easily and then totally changed your cost report.
Yep. Yeah, so that'd be a next step once we have gone into our due diligence phase and produce a Geotech report. Then we'd get the rock levels and plug those in, and then we'd update our estimate with that. Early on, we just kind of put, some general number we have used in the area. Mm-hmm. If we know nothing, because a lot of times we go through the first step, we don't know anything. But before we get too far along, we will know something. That's for sure.
Yeah. A lot of these have been on really constrained sites. How, I guess you typically use it for constrained sites, but do you do any, you mentioned larger open area sites for townhomes and things like that. Do you find it just as useful, less useful, more useful on larger projects?
We're gonna go to the famous one you got here. This one.
Yep.
So this is our alternative. So we build both. We build the urban and the suburban. And so the suburban, we get ones that look just like this almost every time. A guy hand sketches an overlay over something, and we run, the first steps are exactly the same. Pick 2 common points, find it in ESRI Geolocate, find 2 common points there, draw a line between the 2, get them lined up on Earth, and then go to town. So in this one, you've got all these little boxes out here as your buildings. They're all flat, except when you step one like this. So some of them they'll show, okay, we do step departments where you've got a wall that goes across that steps down a full unit level. Our in this case, civil engineer will do that based on the topo he sees. So all these topo lines in here is actually his. Once he pulled off of wherever he got them. So he'll just kind of eyeball it to what makes sense with the site.
Which
You know,
topo? I see his where it looks like
yeah.
he
So
printed it out. Do you trace those, or are you going to use ESRI to
no,
recreate them?
no. So I'm always using ESRI. So he's got it on there. That's part of his sketch. So if I turn it on, it goes away.
Okay.
But that's just part of his sketch that was given to us for pricing. And it does at least give you some idea if it looks. So sometimes you could check an existing line going here. You know, we can just say, you know, I think that's 800. That's his 800. Okay, we're in the same general area here. We've got a big old swale going right down the middle that we can't touch because he thinks it's probably wetlands. So turn that other one off. So in this one, now the process when you begin is the same. The challenge here is two things. One, you got to figure out where your retaining walls are going to be, because with site ops you have to give it something here in order to create that break. So in this case, I did an offset on my boundary over here and created an area. And look at the properties, select all sides. So all of that's delinked. So that allows for a retaining wall, because site ops, you got to give it a retaining wall to build off of, and then it will decide whether it needs it or not. But
What do you mean? So you're telling it put in a 3-foot retaining wall, or you're saying
no, I'm
in,
saying you can put a retaining wall here. I am allowing you to put a retaining wall here, and site ops figures out how much do I need to make the site work. You know? So we can visually see that everything's kind of coming into the swale here, and in order to make the grades flatten the way we need for an apartment, we may very well need to put a wall in here in order to flatten that grade. So I just went ahead and drew the wall, just a potential wall around that swale that's on my property boundary. I think, let's see if I have anything else. Let's see, maybe. So that shows all the walls. I just isolated that layer. That's all the walls I've given it to allow it to build. So these are all split buildings. I like to just link them up so that it can continue that step in grade as it goes around in this case. And then I needed potentially one right here because of this parking area. It was having trouble making that slope work. So
yeah, but it's nice how, like you said, you're not even really designing that wall. You're more just saying, hey, site ops, you might need a wall here, and it's going to give you a 0-inch wall, or it's going to give you a 3 feet wall, kind of whatever
or
works.
no wall. Yeah, it will do no wall if it decides it didn't need. Let's just see if we have a wall there. I can't remember how it works. So it picked up wall here. It picked up some wall here. Around here, it just said, I don't need it. I can make that 3-to-1 work without it. So same on this other side. Oops. It just decides where it wants the wall. Now in here, it all makes sense because I'm forcing these steps at 11 feet because that's what's in the building.
Okay.
And then it makes sense to tie these two together. Now, the key is getting the areas around the building to flatten out like you would normally do in the real world. Because if you don't tell site ops will grade it just as steep as you let it. And the default on a property itself is a 3-to-1 slope. It's a pretty steep slope. So you really don't want a 3-to-1 in front of your building. It's just not natural. So we put in grading constraints to constrain it to a certain less slope. And the grading constraints can overrun anything else. They can just run right over your building. And you can't run them over a wall because then you'd create a real problem because it can't handle crossing a retaining wall, but it can cross anything that you have linked there. And so just to see how many we put in, we'll isolate the layer. And that's the key, is I've got like constraint up here at 10, constraint here at 10. And really what I'm doing, Adam, is playing with these until the site three-dimensionally looks like a real site. That's the key, because I'm not trying to be a full-on civil engineer, but I know enough to know what a site should look like. And so even here, you can kind of see where your steep, oh, we have a steep grade coming in here. That's doable. You know, we can get away with that. We got a really steep grade coming off of here behind these garages. That's doable. If I didn't think it was doable, I could come put a constraint in here. If I said, hey, we need a flat area. And I think you speaking to before is like, how long before you know all these things? And that's just going through enough sites to see what really happens when the site gets designed.
Yeah, and so all the yellow areas that you've traced, that's where typically it's going to grade the whole site 3-to-1. That's the constraint automatically. And then the yellow areas that I see you've traced, you're saying, hey, I'm closer to a building. Don't give me 3-to-1 right up to a building.
Well, here's what SiteOps does if you don't constrain it. So this little island in here, it's not doing it now because I've constrained it. It will dig holes because this is an import site. And I know it's an import site because everything's sloping downward, really steep from the get-go. So you know you're going to have to import to make this site work. It's just a matter of how much. So SiteOps in its infinite wisdom says, hey, you need dirt, I'll give you dirt. I'll dig you a hole right here.
Yeah.
So to counter it, you got to constrain it. So that's why on a suburban site, the constraints are really important to keep it from doing things that are civil no-nos, like digging holes in the middle of islands.
Yeah. There's a lot of grading going on. You're using the grading solver for all of this. How much faith do you have in that grading solver? What, like, on a site this big, are you plus or minus 30% here, plus or minus 20%?
Yeah, it's tough, and we have contingencies, so I don't have to be exact. But the thing is I know it's an import site. I know, and this one came up, I think, a little less than 5,000. I might have probably bumped it 50% or so. It's a little bit of a judgment call.
Okay.
And the thing is just looking at what it's doing and thinking how realistic is what it's doing. Is it because SiteOps, if you let it, will get super aggressive with its grading. And you just kind of got to make a judgment call on, is it getting too aggressive?
Meaning it'll set everything at 3-to-1.
They'll set everything at 3-to-1. Yeah. So really, I just try to go through it enough until I was like, okay, I feel pretty comfortable with it. It might be a little more import than what it's showing, but I think I'm pretty close. So at a conceptual level, I'm happy and I'm moving on. And the walls, I feel pretty good about. The walls are I think are pretty close if you do it right. Mm-hmm. If anything, the walls might be, because what happens is there's a balance between walls and dirt a lot of times. So even when they design it, they may switch that a little bit. But the point being here is I know I've got a feasible site. I got a pretty good idea of what it's going to take dirt-wise to make it work. And I did have another one that had massive amounts of topo on it. I was going to see if I think I got that one handy here. Let's see, get my dates sorted right. Yeah. So this is one, hopefully it looks good when I open it. This is one we did do a lot of V to it. And I changed the design because what happened was the architect, there was so much topo happening on it, the architect couldn't envision the future grades. They were just so far away from what the existing grade is. Because this one's over 100,000 yards of dirt. Let's see if it says I get a 3D view. So this one, yeah. So this one's got real big slopes and stuff happening to it. And what happened was, because of the way the existing topo, the architect thought they could put a split in here and drop this courtyard down. Well, once you did it, you realized that makes no sense at all, because when we're done, we're flattening all this area out and we're hitting all this big slope over here. So it really showed some things that you just couldn't see in the, just by looking at existing topo. You really needed to be able to run this thing. And also they put a split in over here. Again, not helping.
Yeah.
You know, and when I ask about it, it's like, well, that's what the grade is. I said, but we're moving the grade 20 feet over here. So whatever you think you're seeing now is not where we're ended up. So honestly, this is one we just moved through, and being able to run this program really, really helped us make the site feasible and work. Just getting a lot of information that in a short amount of time that you couldn't really get any other way. So certain sites definitely is a huge help to try to do an analysis on it. And I feel pretty good with this one. I mean, because it's straightforward, and but the main thing is kind of knowing, hey, you really don't want to put a split here. It just makes no sense.
Yeah, oh, and I can see too what we spoke about earlier. You allowed it to put a wall, it looks like almost all the way around the site. And then when you go to your 3D view, it put a wall somewhere, and then it didn't have a wall in a lot of those places because it was able to hit that slope.
That's right. Yeah, it figures out just how much wall you got to put in. Exactly.
Yeah, so, and we're wrapping up here. We have a couple more questions. I'm going to switch it over to our contact information. If you want to reach out to me or Ben, and that should be up. Someone was asking, do you use this on every project? How did you estimate before using SiteOps?
Yes, we use it on every project at a conceptual level. We don't use a lot. Once the civil engineer gets going, we're pretty much done with it. But what do we do before SiteOps? Fortunately, I had SiteOps pretty early on here, but before then we had to pay civil engineers to do a grading analysis. So we pay them $5,000 to $10,000, and it would take them a while, and we'd finally get something. So that's we take a stab at it before then, but then ultimately we'd have to end up paying them to do something similar to what this is.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more. Well, that's what I was. Yeah, that's interesting. And so then they would just, you'd wait a while for them to give that back to you, and then you were kind of running all the cost numbers off of their estimate, but you didn't really have any control of, what if a tweak was made, kind of thing.
Yeah. So one thing I would say is that when I first learned of SiteOps' existence, my first inclination was to convince our civil engineer to buy it and do it himself. And then I realized, like, it would be better if I had my own control and could do it rather than rely on whatever it is they were going to do. Because it's more of a preliminary estimating tool, I think, for me. And so I've gotten a lot more out of it just by figuring out what exactly I want from it and cutting them, just not having them get involved.
And do you ever take that to the civil and you say, hey, here's how I think the walls are going to come out best? And you kind of share your SiteOps file? Or do you purely use it?
I mean, I haven't too much. I have probably some on the urbans where we've looked at where the stepping makes sense, and sort of collaborate on that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, the thing is that once the civil gets involved, there's a whole lot of variables they got to consider that get very nuanced. Mm-hmm. And what, the reality is that usually we've been in the same ballpark as we work our way through it, except for the very first one where I just missed, didn't understand it well enough, had to learn. But once I kind of got a feel for how it worked, then yeah, a lot of the times it was more, really what we're doing is we're just making predictions on what the civil engineer ultimately does more than anything. That's kind of how I see it.
Oh yeah.
Because, because their result is the result of many, many man hours. And this comes out in a couple of hours. So obviously their work is going to be better because they're putting a lot more effort into getting there and a lot more expertise and all that stuff. This is a way to basically get an approximation for an estimate in a very short amount of time with a lot less effort.
Yeah, and when we saw you tracing, quite literally cutting corners on some of the
Yes.
courtyard, but you were talking like, or you mentioned how you're just going for a ballpark of where they're going to be at, and you're trying to do you did that site in front of us almost in 15 or 20 minutes before we moved on to the larger area sites. So you're trying to get it that fast.
Yes.
To get what they're going to finish after a couple of weeks.
That or months. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. We have to do an estimate in a very short amount of time, and this is the tool that allows us to do that.
Okay.
All
and
right.
One more. We can final one. I'll ask you, and then we can wrap up here. Is for the smaller sites we're looking at, it's highly constrained. You mentioned it was easier. How long does it take? If you had a new guy come into the office, you introduce some site offs, how long do you think it would be until you had him using that software on his own or her own?
If with, I'd say on an urban site, probably doing it 2, 3, 4 times, and should just running through practice should be able to produce a pretty acceptable output.
Okay.
I think it's more like how many cycles you go through it.
Yeah, how many things you need to encounter to realize.
Yeah.
I got to pin that wall in, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's just a matter of practicing on it and saying, okay, I'm going to take this one through, get there, and how does it look? Did I catch everything? And on an urban one, it shouldn't take too long. And suburban ones, it's just there's more to think about. So before you go though, I do have teed up the Pearl one.
Oh, of course, yeah. Let me hand it right back over to you.
Yeah, definitely want to show that bad guy.
There you go. You should have control now.
All right. So you see that good, Adam?
Yeah, perfect.
All right. So I like to show this one off because this was my first urban deal, and it had 1, 2, 3, 4 slab steps, different slab levels in the building. And this was our original, this was our run at it that we exited Conceptual and went on to go build it. And then here's the actual finished product right from the same perspective. Slab level here, slab level here, slab level here, and then there's one down here. So,
and you can even kind of see with the roof line pretty much exactly
the roof line.
You changed.
Yeah. So this one had a tremendous amount of walls, had a lot of crazy configurations. It was one of the hardest deals we ever had, and being able to model it at a conceptual level was just incredibly important to getting the numbers right and getting understanding going in. And this is one too where we did collaborate a lot on where we put the steps and what made sense. But project was built, was a success, made money, and everybody's happy.
And so because I couldn't imagine, looking at blueprints and just putting, imagining this in your head off of the numbers, looking at finished floor elevation and then seeing exactly how it's going to look versus pulling it up in a model like this where you just press go and it just makes this model for you. and then you can actually
once you get it
visualize it,
traced
spin it around,
and
talk about it.
once you get it traced in there and get your constraints right. But this is the great thing is like once you get and you can see this model, you can get such a better understanding of what you're dealing with. Like such as right from the get-go, you can see this courtyard in here only has this way in on grade. It really doesn't have any other on grade access because everything up here is raised up. And so you'd end up having to come all the way over here. So this even was showing us our logistical issues right from the very beginning.
Yeah, and you can even see right there, or in the bottom right corner, exactly where it goes under and where it meets the curb.
Yeah. So we have some buried wall right there, and right in here is that buried wall right there. So that was a cool one. That one was a good teacher.
That's the right way to look at it. Is they're good teachers.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
thank you for your time, Ben. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining us. You will receive an email of the recording tomorrow. Any closing words?
No, I hope some other folks in here come up with some great new hacks, and we'll share them as well. And we can maybe Adam, we can create a users group where we can share hacks.
Yeah, and I know we have some. We have some kind of spread out. There's one here in Denver, and it's a matter of, we need to get this stuff connected for just like this. I mean, you're scaling, rotating, something I have done plenty of times. It just in CAD in general, that I think I walked you through my process yesterday, and I made it a lot more complicated than it needed to be. So seeing stuff like that, sharing that sort of experience makes it
I'll throw in this last word then. It is a program that takes some patience to learn, but it does, like you said, I don't think you have to have any necessarily experience in the program in CAD or anything like that to be able to learn it. It's just going to y'all's training and just learning it piece by piece on how the thing works, and then once you get going, then you can start hacking away.
Yeah, and because it is simple. We saw what you were using today, building area, and then you were setting those grading constraint areas. Once you had that down, it seemed like that was 90% of what we were working on. So it's kind of, I guess it's getting
the
that.
linking, knowing just how the linking works and where it can mess you up and where you got to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you, Ben. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will see y'all next time. Enjoy. Happy Tuesday.
All right. Thanks, Adam.
Bye, guys.